Hi, it's Nadia here. Today I'm going to show you how to put together my take on an illusion necklace. It's modern and contemporary and really quite beautiful. But before I start, please remember to subscribe to our channel. And also, if you want to get the kit and have all the details, I've put them for you in the box below. So let's start. Let's have a look at the materials that I've included in our kit. The most important thing for making this necklace a standout necklace is making sure that the materials that you're using are quite special. So even though they're quite minimalist, they've got quite a lot of detail in them. I'm going to be using some what we call mock taut discs, which are mock tortoiseshell resin beads. They're flat discs. Mine are a 3 centimeter diameter. I have 2 rings, one which is organic and hammered, and the other one which is textured. Then I have some links, solid brass links, and I've made sure that I've put my gold platings slightly different. One is a satin plating and one is a shiny plating. I have a bead which is called a sandblasted bead, again just for texture, and it's quite a bright gold, and a large satin bead in gold. And I've got some little end caps for this bead because this particular bead has very big holes in it, so they need some covering. Then I've got some crimps, 2mm crimps, crimp covers, 3mm crimp covers. And the secret to making this necklace so special is the chain that I'm using. It is in fact metal chain. It's woven metal. It's as fine as thread, so it's very silky and very beautiful. And I think this makes the difference from the standard illusion necklaces, which would probably use a nylon cord to make it look quite special. So I've got 1 meter of this very fine chain. Flat nose pliers, cutters, my crimp pliers, and you will also need a ruler or a tape measure so that you can work out how to cut your chain. So let's start. The first thing I'm going to do is cut my chain into 4 equal lengths. I'm just going to make it easy on myself I'll just fold it and then cut it. I've got 4 lengths of chain now, and I'm going to work out how I want to place my beads on them. The one thing that each one of these lengths is going to need is either one of the rings or one of these links at each end, because this is what we'll use to link the necklace together. So the first thing that you need to do, make sure that you've got your links, one for each length of chain, and then you can just decide how you want to space the other beads on that particular length. I've laid out my beads so I have a rough idea of how I want it to look. Don't forget that this is an endless necklace, which means that you can wear it any which way that you want. It doesn't have a start or a finish, so feel free to be quite relaxed about your pattern. It will make it more interesting. And the first thing I'm going to do is finish off the ends just as a starting point. So I need to put a crimp on my chain, and then I'm going to put the link, and then I'm going to put it back through my crimp. So with my crimp in place and my little metal chain going through the crimp, through my link and back through my crimp, I'm going to use my crimping pliers to squeeze it into place. And remember that when you use your crimping pliers, you use the second little hole. And with your crimp sitting inside the second hole in your crimping pliers, give it a squeeze to flatten it. And now put it in the first hole of your crimping pliers, because we're just going to curve it a bit so that I can easily place my crimp cover on it later. And I will cut that little tail later, but I'll do that when I put my crimp covers on. So I'm going to leave that little detail to the end. So I'm going to repeat the same thing with all the other links. So always put your crimp on first, then your link, and loop it back on itself and back through your crimp. And then just reduce it so that you've got a shorter tail, so you're not using up so much of your chain, because we want to keep as much of the length as we can. Okay. And then when you've done it, then you can just repeat with your crimping pliers. I've got my 4 links attached to each one of my lengths of chain. I'm just going to finish them. Put your crimp cover around your crimp, and with your flat nose pliers, gently squeeze it closed into place. So it covers your crimp and it just gives it a really professional finish. It just takes seconds to do, but it makes a big difference to the look of your necklace. So I'm going to repeat the same on all 4 strands. So I place my crimp cover above my crimp, and then with my flat nose pliers I'm going to carefully close it and squeeze it into place. I've got my ends finished with my crimp covers, so now I'm going to start putting my beads on each one of the lengths. And the key to this is that each one of these beads is going to be held in place by crimps. So you have to remember to put a crimp, bead, crimp. For every bead you put a crimp in the start and the end. At this point, just feed them onto your chain, and then you can arrange the spacing afterwards. It's just putting the materials on the little chain now that is the next stage that you need to do. So crimp, bead, crimp, and then again for my second bead I'm going to do the same thing. Crimp, bead, and another crimp. Now I'm going to space them so that I can flatten my crimps and the beads will stay at the distance that I want them to be. And it might just be easier to just do this with your flat nose pliers to start off with, because you can leave it flat. And then you can do the second curving of your crimp with your crimping pliers. So I'm really just going to just give my crimp a little squeeze to hold my bead in place, and again on the other side, flatten my crimp and flatten my crimp on the other side. So this way I've kept my beads in place, and it's a much easier way of doing it. And now I'm going to curve them around with my crimping pliers. And again. Next, I'm going to put my crimp covers on my crimps just to give it a nice professional finish. So I'm working my way through my chains, and I'm putting the crimps on with the beads, squeezing them into place, and then putting my crimp covers on. And I'm just going to say that for this particular chain, I've got one of my round beads in the middle, and I apply this onto the chain in exactly the same way. So I'm going to put a crimp on either end. So crimp, bead, crimp, and then I'm going to squeeze them into place and put my crimp covers on. So now that I've crimped my beads and my crimps, my beads are in place, and I can just give them another squeeze and put my crimp covers on them. I'm ready to do my final strand. I'm going to do it in the same way as the other strands, and I just wanted to say that on this particular strand, because I'm using the bigger bead with the end caps, I'm going to put my crimps before and after the end caps, but it's basically done in the same way. So crimp, bead, crimp, crimp, end cap, bead, end cap, crimp. I've threaded my beads onto the last piece of chain, so I'm just going to fix my crimps in place. So I'm just going to roughly work out where this large bead is. Once I've fixed one of the crimps in place, it's quite easy to squeeze the rest of them next to it, so it's easier, it's tidier. It's a bit difficult to see like this, but just bring the rest of your beads to the crimp, and then you can fix it in place quite easily. And now again, I will just, using my crimping pliers, give them another squeeze and put the crimp covers on them to finish it off. With my 4 sections finished, I can now link the necklace together, and I do this by putting the end through a link all the way around, and it will join it together. So you have to do it by putting a crimp on, then you join the link, so you thread it through and back through your crimp. In essence, it's just how we started making them, but now we're joining the parts together. I'm putting my fine chain through the link and back through the crimp, making a loop. I'll bring my crimp a bit closer and just reduce a bit of the thread, a bit of the chain, so it's closer. And now I'm going to put my crimp through my crimp pliers and give it a squeeze to keep it in place. So a little squeeze here, which will flatten my crimp and secure it, and then I'll just curve it again with my crimping pliers. So that I'm able to put a crimp cover on it. I'm going to trim off that little excess tail that I've got with my cutters, and be careful not to cut into your chain, the necklace chain, so as close as you can, just to get rid of the excess. And now I can place my crimp cover on my crimp. I've got my crimp cover covering my crimp, and the opening is facing me so that I can see how to close it properly. I'm going to bring the ends together and close it. Covering my crimp and joining the two sections of my necklace together. Next, I'm going to join the second end through my loop. I put a crimp on the end, through my loop, and back through my loop, and back through the crimp. So I'm making a loop with my chain. I'll just bring it a bit closer, and my crimp a little closer. Don't do it too close because you still have to put a crimp cover on it, but just so that it's a nice neat loop. And now I'm going to put it through my crimping pliers and squeeze it to catch both ends and keep it in place. And now I can curve it again with my crimping pliers so that I'm able to put the crimp cover on it. So sometimes you just need to do this a couple of times at different angles just to get it to curve around so that you're able to put your crimp cover on it. And my tail is very short on this particular one, so I'm not going to bother cutting it. There's no need. So I've got my crimp inside my crimp cover, and I'm gently going to squeeze the ends of my crimp cover together to close it and cover the crimp. So I've got two sections linked, and I'm going to link the end to the last section. So now I've got a neat loop going through my crimp twice, and I'm going to use my crimping pliers to crimp it in place. I've got the 4 parts of my necklace linked up, and the good news is that the end is in sight. All we have left to do now is join the chain through the last link. We do this by putting a crimp onto the chain, then looping it around the link and back through the crimp, and I'm just going to reduce some of the chain. So I have my loop in place and I'm ready to flatten my crimp and put my crimp cover on it. And I'm just going to trim a little bit of that excess tail with my cutters. I'm going to put my finger just below it to make sure that I don't cut into my chain underneath, so as close as you can to get rid of the excess. And now I'm going to put a crimp cover on that crimp. Our beautiful endless necklace is finished. Enjoy making it and wearing it. Leave us feedback. We love hearing your comments, and I look forward to seeing you for our next project.